The Channel waters turned black and merciless beneath the invasion fleet, as Private First Class Robert Sullivan gripped his rifle with white knuckles, salt spray stinging his face like frozen needles. Dawn was still hours away on June 6, 1944, but already the horizon flickered with distant gunfire, the opening symphony of the largest seaborne invasion in human history. Sullivan belonged to the 1st Infantry Division, the legendary Big Red One, crammed shoulder to shoulder with 3,000 other soldiers aboard the USS Samuel Chase. The landing craft wallowed sickeningly in the heavy seas, and the stench of vomit mixed with diesel fuel and fierce sweat created an atmosphere thick enough to cut. Men who had joked and played cards just hours before now sat in grim silence, some clutching photographs of sweethearts, others fingering rosary beads with trembling hands. "Listen up, you sons of bitches," Sergeant William Hayes bellowed over the roar of engines and crashing waves. His weathered face, scarred from campaigns in North Africa and Sicily, showed no emotion as he surveyed his men. "In 2 hours, we're going to hit Omaha Beach. Jerry's been digging in for 4 years, and he's not planning to roll out the welcome mat." The briefing had been thorough, but terrifying. Intelligence reports indicated that Field Marshal Erwin Rommel had transformed the Norman coastline into a fortress of unprecedented strength. Concrete bunkers bristling with 88mm guns commanded every approach. Steel obstacles called hedgehogs and Czech hedgehogs littered the beaches, designed to rip the bottoms out of landing craft. Behind these lay a maze of barbed wire, minefields, and machine gun nests, all positioned with Teutonic precision to create interlocking fields of fire. As referenced in wartime reports from the Combined Operations Headquarters, the German Atlantic Wall represented 4 years of intensive fortification efforts along the European coast. The enemy had prepared for this moment with methodical thoroughness, turning every cliff, every dune, every farmhouse into a potential killing ground. Sullivan's thoughts drifted to his hometown of Cedar Rapids, Iowa, where his mother would be, starting her morning shift at the ammunition factory. She had no idea that her youngest son was about to storm the most heavily defended beach in the world. The irony wasn't lost on him. The bullets she helped manufacture might soon be flying over his head, fired by American guns at German positions. The ship's public address system crackled to life with the voice of Captain Miller. "Attention all personnel. We are now 30 minutes from H hour. Chaplains will be conducting final services on the mess deck for those who wish to attend." Around Sullivan, soldiers began the ritual of final preparations. They checked and rechecked equipment, adjusted helmet straps, and whispered last-minute prayers. Some men wrote hurried letters they hoped they'd never need to send. Others simply stared into the darkness, lost in private thoughts of home, duty, and mortality. The landing craft engines suddenly throttled up to full power, their roar drowning out all conversation. Through the spray-lashed darkness, the first pale hints of dawn began to streak the eastern sky. Somewhere ahead, beyond the wall of fog and ocean spray, lay the coast of Nazi-occupied France, and waiting behind those cliffs, an entire German division determined to drive the invaders back into the sea. Sullivan touched the St. Christopher medal his girlfriend had given him before shipping out. In 30 minutes, he would find out if saints still worked miracles on the beaches of Normandy. The ramp of landing craft infantry number 347 dropped with a metallic clang that was immediately swallowed by the thunder of German artillery. Private First Class Sullivan found himself waist-deep in the frigid waters of Omaha Beach, the weight of his waterlogged equipment dragging him down as machine gun bullets hissed and snapped overhead like deadly hornets. "Move, move, get off the beach," Sergeant Hayes screamed, but his voice was barely audible above the cacophony of battle. The morning sky had exploded into a hellish panorama of smoke, flame, and flying metal. German 88mm shells burst among the landing craft with devastating precision, sending geysers of seawater and human debris skyward. Sullivan stumbled forward through the surf, his boots slipping on the rocky bottom as he struggled toward the narrow strip of sand that stretched before the cliffs. All around him, the carefully rehearsed plans of Operation Overlord were dissolving into chaos. The preliminary bombardment that was supposed to soften German defenses had largely missed its targets, leaving the enemy positions intact and deadly. The beach presented a scene from Dante's Inferno. Bodies floated in the surf alongside discarded equipment, life preservers, and fragments of destroyed landing craft. Men crawled through the sand seeking shelter behind the steel anti-tank obstacles that the Germans had so thoughtfully provided. Others lay motionless, their blood mixing with salt water and sand. Lieutenant Colonel George Taylor of the 16th Infantry Regiment, his uniform already torn by shrapnel, rallied a group of survivors near a partially destroyed seawall. "There are two kinds of people staying on this beach," he shouted. "The dead and those who are going to die. Now let's get the hell out of here." According to contemporary accounts from military historians, the initial assault waves on Omaha Beach suffered casualty rates exceeding 90% in some units. The German 352nd Infantry Division, commanded by General Dietrich Krase, had positioned their defenders with lethal effectiveness. Sullivan pressed himself against the concrete barrier, breathing heavily as bullets chipped fragments from the structure inches from his head. To his left, he could see Private Tommy Martinez from El Paso, Texas, methodically loading his Browning automatic rifle. Despite a shrapnel wound in his shoulder, blood seeped through Martinez's torn fatigue jacket, but his hands remained steady as he prepared to provide covering fire. Sullivan, Hayes crawled through the sand toward them, his helmet dented and his face blackened with curdite. "We need to take out that machine gun nest at 11 o'clock. It's cutting our boys to pieces." The sergeant pointed toward a concrete emplacement roughly 200 yards up the beach, where the muzzle flash of a German MG-40 machine gun winked like a malevolent eye. The weapon's distinctive sound of buzzsaw ripping through fabric had earned it the nickname Hitler's Zipper among Allied troops. Sullivan nodded, checked his rifle, and prepared to leave the shelter of the concrete barrier. Fear gnawed at his stomach like a living thing, but training and the desperate situation left no room for hesitation around him. Other soldiers were making similar decisions, ordinary men from farms and factories, transformed by necessity into instruments of war. The tide was rising, and with it came a fresh wave of landing craft carrying reinforcements and supplies. Some made it to shore, others erupted in flames as German artillery found their range. But gradually, inexorably, the sheer weight of American determination and firepower began to tell. As Sullivan prepared to advance up the beach, he caught sight of Brigadier General Norman Cota, the 29th Infantry Division's assistant commander, calmly walking among the troops under fire. The general's presence electrified the men, transforming their terror into grim resolve. "Rangers, lead the way," Cota called out to a group of elite soldiers, and Sullivan found himself joining the charge. The cliffs of Point Du Hoc rose like medieval castle walls above Lieutenant Colonel James Earl Rudder and his 225 Rangers, their faces etched with the grim determination of men attempting the impossible. These were the elite of the elite, hand-picked volunteers who had trained for months to scale the 100-foot precipice and destroy the German guns that could devastate the invasion fleet. Rudder checked his watch. 0700 hours. 30 minutes behind schedule due to navigation errors in the rough seas. Every minute of delay meant more German defenders awakening to the threat, more opportunities for Field Marshal Rommel's reserves to respond. The element of surprise, so crucial to their mission's success, was slipping away like sand through an hourglass. "Rockets away," Sergeant Jack Coon shouted, triggering the specially modified UKW amphibious vehicles that launched grappling hooks and rope ladders toward the cliff face. The rockets hissed skyward, trailing thick climbing ropes behind them like metallic spider webs. Some found purchase in the chalk and stone. Others fell back to earth as German defenders cut the lines or the hooks failed to hold in the crumbling cliff face. Staff Sergeant Leonard Lommel shouldered his Thompson submachine gun and grabbed the nearest rope. At 24, he was already a veteran of campaigns across North Africa and Italy, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. German potato masher grenades tumbled down from above, exploding in showers of rock and shrapnel. Machine gun fire swept the narrow beach, forcing Rangers to press themselves against the cliff face as bullets ricocheted off stone. "Climb, you bastards, climb," Rudder bellowed, leading by example as he began his ascent. The rope burned through his gloves as he hauled himself upward, hand over hand, while German defenders poured small arms fire down from prepared positions. To his left, Private First Class Otto Stevens from Minnesota cried out and plummeted into the surf, his rope severed by enemy fire, as documented in official after-action reports from the 2nd Ranger Battalion. The assault on Point Du Hoc represented one of the most audacious commando operations in military history. The strategic importance of the position could not be overstated. German intelligence had positioned 6 155mm guns, capable of interdicting both Utah and Omaha beaches. Lommel reached a ledge 30 feet up the cliff, faced and paused to catch his breath. Looking down, he could see more landing craft approaching through the smoke and spray, carrying precious reinforcements. But the German fire was intensifying as defenders rushed to the cliff edge with rifles, machine pistols, and grenades. Time was running out for the Rangers clinging to the precipice, covering fire. Someone shouted from below, and the remaining Rangers on the beach opened up with everything they had. Browning automatic rifles chattered, M1 Garands cracked, imprecise 8-round clips, and a lone bazooka team sent rockets screaming toward German positions. The suppressing fire allowed more climbers to gain precious yards up the cliff face. Ranger Frank South reached the top first, hauling himself over the edge with superhuman effort before immediately engaging German defenders with his carbine. Within minutes, a dozen Rangers had gained the summit and were fighting desperately to establish a foothold. They moved like ghosts through the pre-dawn darkness, using hand signals and whispered commands to coordinate their assault on the gun positions. What they found exceeded their worst fears and greatest hopes simultaneously. The massive concrete casemates were indeed there, exactly where intelligence had predicted. But as Lommel crept toward the nearest emplacement, carbine at the ready, he made a discovery that would alter the course of the battle. The gun positions were empty, where 6 deadly artillery pieces should have commanded the invasion beaches. Only wooden decoys painted to look like cannons greeted the Rangers. The real guns had been moved inland, beyond the reach of naval bombardment, but still capable of devastating effect. Once their crews received orders to fire, Lommel signaled to his squad leader, Sergeant Harry Fate, and pointed toward the interior. Somewhere in the Norman countryside, the actual battery waited to unleash hell on the invasion fleet. The Rangers' mission had just become infinitely more complicated, but failure was not an option. Too many lives hung in the balance, and dawn was breaking over the bloodiest beach in France. The Norman hedgerows stretched like green walls across the countryside, each one a potential fortress, where German paratroopers from the 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment waited in ambush. Staff Sergeant Leonard Lommel moved through the pre-dawn darkness with the practiced stealth of a hunter, his Thompson submachine gun ready as he searched for the missing artillery battery that could devastate the invasion fleet. Behind him, Rangers Frank South and Jack Coombe followed in single file, their boots making no sound on the dew-soaked grass. They had left the cliff-top chaos of Point du Hoc 30 minutes earlier, following a dirt road that intelligence suggested led to secondary gun positions. Every shadow could conceal an enemy soldier. Every rustling head might hide a machine gun nest. Movement to a clock, South whispered, dropping to one knee and raising his M1 carbine. Through the morning mist, they could see German soldiers moving between camouflage positions, their coal scuttle helmets silhouetted against the brightening sky. The enemy seemed unaware of the Rangers' presence, focused instead on preparing their weapons for the anticipated counterattack. Lommel signaled for his men to spread out and advance. These weren't the coastal defenders they had fought at the cliff face. These were elite Fallschirmjäger, Germany's airborne troops, veterans of Crete and the Eastern Front. They would not break easily, and they would fight with the desperate skill of men defending their homeland. The first burst of German machine gun fire shattered the morning quiet, sending bullets snapping through the hedgerow inches above Lommel's head. He rolled left, seeking cover behind a stone wall as his squad mates returned fire. The familiar chatter of American automatic weapons, mixed with the distinctive buzzsaw sound of the German MG-42, creating a deadly symphony that echoed across the Norman countryside. Grenade, Kuhn shouted, and all 3 Rangers pressed themselves against the earth as a potato masher explosive detonated nearby, showering them with dirt and stone fragments. The acrid smell of cordite mixed with the sweet scent of crushed grass and wildflowers, creating an incongruous blend of war and peace. According to declassified intelligence reports from the Office of Strategic Services, the German 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment had been specifically positioned in Normandy to counter any Allied airborne operations. Their presence behind Omaha Beach represented a significant threat to the invasion's success. Lommel belly-crawled forward, using the natural cover of the hedgerow to approach the German position. Through gaps in the foliage, he could see concrete emplacements that hadn't appeared on any Allied reconnaissance photographs. The Germans had been busy during the months leading up to the invasion, creating defensive positions that existed nowhere in Allied intelligence files. There, South pointed through the morning mist toward a camouflaged area roughly 200 yards inland. The unmistakable silhouettes of artillery pieces emerged from beneath careful camouflage netting the missing 155mm guns. From Point Du Hoc, German crews were already positioning the weapons for firing, their movements suggesting they had received orders to engage targets on the invasion beaches. The Rangers faced an impossible decision. They were deep behind enemy lines, outnumbered at least 10-1, with no hope of reinforcement. But those guns could not be allowed to fire on the thousands of Allied soldiers, still struggling to establish footholds on Omaha and Utah beaches. Every minute of delay meant more American casualties, more mothers receiving telegrams that began with the words they dreaded most. Lommel checked his ammunition supply, 3 full magazines for his Thompson, plus 2 fragmentation grenades. South had his carbine and for grenades, while Kuhn carried a Browning automatic rifle with 6 magazines against an entire German artillery battery with infantry support. Their chances appeared suicidal. But as Lommel had learned during brutal campaigns across North Africa and Italy, impossible odds sometimes yielded to audacity, speed, and sheer determination. The Rangers had been trained for exactly this type of mission: deep penetration raids. Behind enemy lines where conventional tactics failed, we take out those guns. Lommel whispered to his companions, whatever it costs, those guns don't fire. On our boys. The 3 Rangers began their final approach through the Norman hedgerows. Knowing that dawn was breaking over the most important battle in human history, Admiral Alan Goodrich Kirk stood on the bridge of the USS Augusta, watching the Norman coastline through powerful binoculars as the largest naval bombardment in history commenced. The time was 0600 hours, and the fate of Western civilization hung in the balance as 700 Allied warships opened fire simultaneously on German coastal defenses. All batteries commenced firing. Came the order across ship to ship, radio, and the sea erupted in thunder and flame. The battleship USS Texas, her 16-inch guns elevated to maximum range, sent shells weighing as much as small automobiles screaming toward German bunkers. The concussion from each salvo rolled across the water like physical blows, rattling windows and eardrums for miles. Captain Harry Sanders commanded the destroyer USS Satterlee, positioned just 3,000 yards offshore, close enough to see individual German soldiers running between defensive positions. His 5-inch guns fired in rapid succession, their shells tearing gaps in barbed wire obstacles and collapsing concrete bunkers that had taken years to build. Target bearing 270 degrees, range for 1,000 yards, called out fire. Control Officer Lieutenant Robert Chen, his voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. German artillery position confirmed. The Satterlee's gun swiveled with mechanical precision, tracking toward a camouflaged battery that had been harassing landing craft throughout the morning. Sanders watched through his rangefinder as the first salvo bracketed the target, sending up geysers of earth and concrete fragments. The second salvo found its mark, silencing the German guns in a spectacular explosion that could be seen from miles away. Meanwhile, on Utah Beach, the naval gunfire had achieved near-perfect accuracy. The preliminary bombardment had caught German defenders by surprise, destroying many defensive positions before they could respond effectively. The 4th Infantry Division, led by Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr., found themselves facing significantly lighter resistance than their counterparts at Omaha Beach. As documented in operational reports from Task Force 1 to 5, the naval bombardment expended over 10,000 tons of high-explosive shells during the first hour of the assault. The psychological effect on German defenders proved as devastating as the physical destruction. Roosevelt, the eldest son of the former president, hobbled through the sand dunes with a walking stick, his arthritis and heart condition forgotten. In the excitement of battle, at 56, he was the oldest man in the first wave, but his presence electrified the troops around him. When the landing craft had drifted south of their intended target, Roosevelt made the crucial decision that saved thousands of lives. "We'll start the war from right here," he declared, pointing inland toward a gap in German defenses that hadn't appeared on pre-invasion maps. His quick thinking and aggressive leadership turned a potential disaster into a spectacular success. As the 4th Infantry Division poured through the unexpected opening, back at sea, the heavy cruiser HMS Belfast added her 6-inch guns to the bombardment, her shells arcing over the invasion fleet to strike German positions beyond the immediate beach areas. The British crew had been fighting for nearly 5 years, and they brought hard-won experience to bear as they methodically dismantled enemy strongpoints. Direct hit on Jerry's bunker, shouted gunnery officer Sub-Lieutenant James Morrison, watching through his telescope as a German machine gun position disappeared in smoke and debris. The satisfaction in his voice was evident. Too many good men had died because of those concrete fortifications, and revenge tasted sweet. The bombardment created a hellish landscape along the Norman coast. German survivors later described the experience as living through an earthquake and volcanic eruption simultaneously. Concrete bunkers that had seemed impregnable cracked and collapsed under the relentless pounding. Communication lines were severed, supply dumps exploded, and carefully prepared defensive plans disintegrated under tons of high explosive. But the naval guns could not reach every German position, and many defenders survived in deep bunkers and reinforced casemates as the bombardment lifted and landing craft approached the beaches. These survivors emerged to man their weapons with deadly effect. The price of victory would still be measured in blood and courage, as thousands of young men prepared to charge into the teeth of Hitler's Atlantic Wall. The thunder from the sea had opened the door to Europe, but someone still had to walk through. It died by noon on June 6th. The outcome of the battle hung by the thinnest of threads. Private First Class Robert Sullivan found himself part of a desperate push up the bluffs. Behind Omaha Beach, his 1st Infantry Division finally gaining ground. After 6 hours of bloody stalemate, the German defenders of the 352nd Infantry Division were being pushed back, but they contested every yard with the ferocity of cornered wolves. Colonel George Taylor's earlier words echoed in Sullivan's mind as he scrambled up the steep incline, using rifle butts and bayonets to dig handholds in the chalky soil. Behind him, the beach that had been a killing ground at dawn now resembled a vast military supply depot. Landing craft continued to arrive despite sporadic German artillery fire. Disgorging reinforcements, ammunition, and medical supplies keep moving, Sergeant Hayes shouted, his voice hoarse from 6 hours of continuous combat. Blood from a shrapnel wound on his forehead had dried into a dark mask, but his rifle remained steady as he provided covering fire for his advancing squad. The non-commissioned officers like Hayes were the backbone of the American Army professional, soldiers who transformed civilian volunteers into effective fighting units. Sullivan reached a shell crater and dropped inside, breathing heavily as German machine gun bullets snapped overhead. To his left, he could see Private Tommy Martinez setting up his Browning automatic rifle behind a shattered concrete barrier. Martinez had been wounded twice during the morning assault, but he refused evacuation, claiming his squad needed his firepower more than he needed medical attention. The breakthrough had come when naval gunfire observers finally established communications with the offshore fleet. Destroyers like the USS McCook had moved to within 1,000 yards of shore so close their keels scraped bottom to provide point-blank fire support. The risk was enormous, but the desperate situation on Omaha Beach demanded desperate measures. Lieutenant Colonel Sidney Bingham of the 116th Infantry Regiment led a charge against German positions that had been softened by naval bombardment. His men moved with the mechanical precision of a well-oiled machine, using Bangalore torpedoes to blast gaps in barbed wire obstacles and flamethrowers to clear bunkers that resisted conventional assault. According to Contemporary Battlefield reports from Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, the successful penetration of German defenses at Omaha Beach occurred when small unit leaders took initiative in the absence of higher command authority. The fog of war had disrupted communication, but individual courage filled the gap. Staff Sergeant Leonard Lomel and his Rangers had succeeded in their mission behind enemy lines, destroying the relocated German artillery battery with thermite grenades before fighting their way back to Allied positions. Their success meant that German long-range guns could not interdict the steady stream of reinforcements crossing the channel. On Utah Beach, Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr. continued his inspired leadership, personally directing traffic as American forces expanded their beachhead. His decision to attack from an unplanned position had turned potential disaster into spectacular success, with casualties far lighter than anticipated. The German response was beginning to show signs of coordination as reserves arrived from inland positions. General Lieutenant Dietrich Krase had committed his last mobile reserves to a counterattack designed to drive the Americans back into the sea. German Tiger tanks from the 21st Panzer Division were moving toward the coast, their 88mm guns capable of devastating any Allied armor that had managed to land. But the window of opportunity was closing for the defenders. Allied air superiority meant that German reinforcements moved only at night or in small groups. During daylight hours, the Luftwaffe, once the terror of European skies, could manage only token resistance against overwhelming Allied fighter strength. Sullivan fixed his bayonet and prepared for the final push toward the village of Colville-sur-Mer. Around him, thousands of American soldiers were making the same decision ordinary men from farms and factories, transformed by necessity into the liberators of Europe. The casualties had been horrific, but the beachhead was secure. The longest day was far from over, but the tide of battle had turned. Hitler's Atlantic Wall had been breached, and nothing would ever be the same as the sun set on June 6, 1944. Private First Class Robert Sullivan stood on the cliffs, overlooking Omaha Beach, watching the endless stream of men and materiel flowing ashore. The nightmare landscape of 12 hours earlier had been transformed into a scene of organized chaos, as Allied engineers worked frantically to expand the beachhead, before German reinforcements could mount an effective counterattack below him. The beach that had claimed so many lives now served as a vast staging area for the liberation of Europe. Sherman tanks rolled off landing craft onto steel matting laid across the sand, while bulldozers carved roads up the bluffs that had seemed impossible to climb at dawn. Medical stations treated a steady stream of wounded soldiers, but for every casualty being evacuated, 10 healthy reinforcements took his place. Sullivan's 1st Infantry Division had achieved all its D-Day objectives despite horrific losses. The village of Colville-sur-Mer was in American hands, and advanced patrols were pushing inland toward their phase line objectives. Sergeant Hayes, his head now properly bandaged by medics, was reorganizing what remained of their squad while replacements arrived from follow-up waves. "Hard to believe we made it," said Private Martinez, cleaning his Browning automatic rifle with the meticulous care of a professional soldier. His wounded shoulder was in a sling, but he had refused evacuation, insisting that his experience was too valuable to waste on a hospital ship. "This morning I thought we were all dead men." The cost had been enormous. The 1st Infantry Division alone had suffered over 2,000 casualties during the assault, with some companies losing 90% of their strength. The 16th Infantry Regiment's first wave had been virtually annihilated before gaining a foothold on the bluffs. But they had accomplished their mission. The Atlantic Wall was broken, and Hitler's fortress Europe lay open to invasion. At Point du Hoc, Lieutenant Colonel James Earl Rudder's Rangers continued to hold their cliff-top positions. Despite repeated German counterattacks, only 90 men remained from the original force of 225, but they clung to their precarious foothold with desperate determination. Relief was coming. Advance elements of the 5th Ranger Battalion were fighting their way inland from Omaha Beach. Staff Sergeant Leonard Lommel had rejoined his unit after destroying the German artillery battery, bringing valuable intelligence about enemy positions inland. His small patrol had achieved a strategic victory that would resonate far beyond Normandy. The missing guns would never again threaten Allied shipping in the Channel, as documented in final operational reports from 21st Army Group Headquarters. D-Day has succeeded beyond the most optimistic projections. Despite the terrible casualties at Omaha Beach, over 150,000 Allied soldiers were now ashore in Normandy, with more arriving every hour. On Utah Beach, Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr. continued his tireless efforts to expand the American foothold, personally directing the movement of supplies and reinforcements despite his age and physical ailments. His leadership had transformed what could have been a disaster into an unqualified success, earning him a posthumous Medal of Honor when he died of a heart attack 5 weeks later. The German response had been hampered by confusion and Adolf Hitler's interference with tactical decisions. Field Marshal Rommel was in Germany celebrating his wife's birthday, while other senior commanders hesitated to commit reserves without explicit orders from the Führer. By the time German High Command recognized the Normandy landings as the main invasion rather than a diversion, the opportunity to drive the Allies back into the sea had passed. As darkness fell over the Norman coast, flares and tracer bullets continued to streak across the sky, but the sound of gunfire was diminishing. German resistance was stiffening as reserves arrived, but the critical beachhead phase was complete. The Allies had their foothold in Hitler's Europe, purchased with the blood of thousands of young men who would never see home again. Sullivan pulled out the St. Christopher medal his girlfriend had given him, now tarnished with salt spray and gunpowder residue. Somehow, against all odds, he had survived the longest day. Tomorrow would bring new battles as the Allies pushed inland toward Paris and Berlin. but tonight belonged to those who had stormed the beaches of Normandy and lived to tell the tale that the liberation of Europe had begun.